The rain fell with no intention of stopping, thick, endless sheets slapping against the windshield of a black Bentley as it carved through Chicago's deserted streets. The world outside blurred into streaks of neon and reflections, but Eric Anderson didn't see any of it inside. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, jaw clenched so tight that it ached. He wasn't running from a bad business deal or a Wall Street headline. No, this storm was entirely his own. Just 2 hours earlier, he had stood in the soaring office atop Anderson Financial Tower, his kingdom, his throne. He had everything: power, legacy, wealth, a last name that commanded rooms before he ever spoke. And yet, with one sterile sentence from a gray-haired doctor, everything had fractured. Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry. The tests confirm you're infertile. There's no medical option to reverse this. The word infertile didn't feel medical. It felt like a sentence. It felt like his father's voice from years ago, echoing like thunder through the car's silence. You are the legacy, Eric. One day your son will carry this name. That's what matters. But what happens when your name ends with you? He pressed the gas harder. Rain blurred the red lights and headlights became mere smears. Horns blared, tires hissed. None of it registered. His mind tunneled into the past, the disappointed eyes of his late father, the sterile expectations of boardrooms, and the gaping silence of his penthouse apartment, where nothing breathed except the hum of automated lights and loneliness. He didn't see the curve ahead, didn't hear the scream of tires as they lost grip on the soaked pavement. And then metal, screaming, glass, a split second of weightlessness, then black. Across town, Astrid Moore folded her lesson plans into her worn leather bag and stepped out of Southside High, beneath an umbrella too small for the storm. Her day had been long filled with teenagers navigating far more than just literature, some of them navigating poverty, grief, and survival. She adjusted her glasses and sighed. Teaching wasn't a job for her. It was a promise. She had once made it to her mother, Grace Moore, on her deathbed. I'll do something good with my life. I'll build something that matters. Most nights that promise lived inside her small classroom walls and the community center she ran after school, where forgotten kids found books instead of bullets. But fate was writing a different lesson plan that night. As she crossed the overpass toward home, a burst of orange light caught her eye. An explosion down the road, flames clawing at the sky. A car had crashed and flipped, metal twisted like ribbon. Gasoline painted the road. She didn't hesitate. Parking haphazardly, she leapt into the rain, sneakers sliding on slick pavement as she raced toward the wreckage. Every step fought wind and fire. She clawed at the warped door, her palms scraping open against jagged steel. And when it wouldn't budge, she screamed into the storm and pulled again. It gave way. Inside, a man slumped, unconscious, blood trailing down his temple. "Hey!" she shouted. "Stay with me!" He didn't respond. She hooked her arms under his and dragged him away from the car, just as fire licked the undercarriage. Seconds later, boom! The wreckage exploded behind her, heat chasing their retreat. Sirens cried in the distance. Adrenaline screamed louder. She cradled the stranger's head, rain, mixing with soot and blood. His face was ghostly pale, but his breath was shallow, still fighting. When his eyes fluttered open, confused and wounded, their gazes locked. Blue eyes hollowed but sharp, hers dark, steady, unwavering. And just like that, the world shifted. As the EMTs pulled him onto a stretcher, a firefighter turned to her. "Ma'am, your name?" She hesitated, then shook her head softly. "It doesn't matter. He's alive. That's enough." She walked away without a second glance, soaked to the bone, unaware that she had just rewritten the ending of a legacy that was supposed to die with a last name, and that the man she saved would move heaven and earth to find her. Sometimes the people we're meant to meet are those who find us in our darkest moment and pull us back into the light. If this opening chapter stirred something in you, I invite you to stay for what's coming next. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about healing legacy and choosing the family we build. Please like and comment below, and don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss Eric and Astrid's story, because destiny is just beginning. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp, clean, and unfamiliar. Light filtered through slanted blinds and stripes of dull gray lay across the white walls of the private recovery suite. A heart monitor beeped in quiet rhythm, like a clock ticking toward something unspoken. Eric Anderson stirred. Pain bloomed across his ribs as consciousness crept in slow, heavy, like surfacing from the depths of a dream he hadn't wanted to leave. His mind was foggy, but her face cut through it like moonlight through mist. Not a doctor. Not a nurse. A woman. Brown skin-soaked hair, fierce eyes full of fear and fire. She had dragged him from a burning car. She had saved his life. He turned his head and winced. The movement ignited a stabbing ache in his temple. A bandage wrapped around his brow. His limbs were intact if bruised. He was lucky. So the nurse had said when he'd slipped back into sleep hours ago. Lucky to be alive. But he didn't feel lucky. He felt haunted. The woman's hands had held him in the rain, warm despite the storm. She hadn't spoken much, just enough to pull him out of death. Who was she? He pressed the call button, and moments later, a nurse entered, young, with tired eyes and a clipboard. The woman he rasped, throat dry, voice coarse. From the crash. The one who pulled me out. Who was she? The nurse blinked. She left before we could get a name. Didn't want recognition. Said it didn't matter. Didn't matter. He let out a bitter breath, sinking deeper into the stiff mattress. Everything in his world was defined by price label and legacy. He had built an empire with contracts, clauses, guarantees, and ownership. And yet here was a stranger who had risked her life and asked for nothing. Not even acknowledgement. It didn't make sense, and it left him restless. Eric called his assistant 2 days later, back in a less confining room, half swallowed by expensive sheets he hadn't asked for. "Find her," he said. "I don't care how long it takes." On the other side of the city, Astrid Moore sat by the window in her small third-floor apartment, a mug of lukewarm tea cradled between her palms. Outside, the rain had become mist, clinging to the power lines like silk. Inside, her apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Home. But her mind wasn't on lesson plans or grading essays. It was back on the overpass. On the fire. On the man. She didn't know his name. She hadn't asked and hadn't needed to. At the moment, there was only one truth: he needed help. And something deep in her had refused to let him die. Astrid didn't consider herself brave, not in the way people imagined. She was steady, practical, fierce, only when she had to be. She had grown up in Southside without a father and lost her mother to cancer when she was 12. There was no space for fear in a life like hers. And yet now, she looked down at her stomach. Her fingers instinctively rested there over the soft curve of her belly. They moved, not much, just a gentle flutter, like butterfly wings brushing from the inside. The twins had been quiet all day, but now they stirred, as if reminding her they were here with her. "I did the right thing," she whispered to herself. "I had to." The pregnancy wasn't part of any plan. It was the consequence of a fleeting romance that vanished the moment she spoke the words, "I'm pregnant," to Marcus. He had left without looking back, and she had not chased him. But now, every decision felt weightier. Every action echoed. She wasn't just living for herself anymore. She had told no one about the babies. Not yet. Not even her best friend is at the center. Not because she was ashamed, but because this time she wanted to do it right, without pity, without judgment, without anyone doubting her strength. Still, the face of the man flickered in her mind. His pallor, the blood on his temple, the way his fingers had twitched when she gripped his shoulder. And those eyes. Not cold, not entitled, just lost. Had he survived? Did he remember her? She told herself it didn't matter. That night had been a choice. One moment. She wasn't owed anything from him. She didn't need to know his name. But something lingered in her, something unshakable. Her life had intersected with something far larger than herself, and the ripples were still moving outward. At Anderson Tower, Olivia Bennett walked into her boss's recovery room with a file in hand. Her heels tapped against the marble floor like a ticking clock. She set the manila folder on the edge of his bed. Her name's Astrid Moore, she said. 35, high school teacher, Southside native, single, no criminal record, no debt, runs a youth community center on the weekends, lived in the same neighborhood for over a decade. Self-made, self-sufficient, quiet life. Eric didn't speak at first. He stared at the photo clipped inside. It wasn't candid. It was from the center's website, Astrid surrounded by kids smiling. Eyes lit, head high. He traced the photo with a fingertip. "She saved me," he murmured. Olivia narrowed her eyes. "Eric, you don't know her." He looked up slowly, something old and haunted gone from his expression, and replaced by a softness Olivia didn't recognize. "No," he said, "but I want to." Mama Ruth's Diner sat on the corner of 83rd and Maple, a place that smelled like history and homemade butter. The place where time moved slowly. Tables had names carved into them by generations of hands, and secrets were exchanged over sweet tea and warm cornbread. It wasn't the place Eric Anderson had ever set foot in. Yet here he was, sitting stiffly in the far booth, beneath a flickering ceiling fan, wearing a tailored gray suit that did nothing to hide how misplaced he looked. His polished leather shoes tapped an uneven rhythm beneath the scuffed linoleum floor. He wasn't used to waiting. But today, he would stay as long as it took. He kept glancing at the door, at every figure that entered. And then, there she was. Astrid Moore stepped inside like she belonged in the place which she did. She wore a simple navy dress, and a faint look of hesitation, as if uncertain whether she'd made the right decision in coming. Her hair was tied up, exposing the graceful line of her neck. There was no makeup, no show, just her. Eric stood quickly, nearly knocking over his water. "Astrid," he asked. She stopped, brows lifting slightly. "You're the man from the car." He gave a breathless nod. "Eric Anderson." A pause, then a polite smile, cautious, but not unkind. "Well, I'm glad to see you alive, Mr. Anderson." "Eric," he said, gesturing awkwardly to the seat across from him. "Please." She quietly slid into the booth, folding her hands on the table. "You didn't have to go through the trouble of finding me." "I couldn't not," he said. "You saved my life." Astrid looked away, her gaze landing on a chalkboard menu scrawled with fading chalk. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," he said, his voice firmer. "Not everyone runs into a burning car for a stranger." She didn't reply right away. The air between them felt delicate, like a silk thread stretched between two cliffs. A waitress came by, cheerful and oblivious to the gravity seated in her booth. They ordered coffee for Eric, chamomile tea, and cornbread for Astrid. When the drinks arrived, so did the silence. Eric leaned forward. "I wanted to thank you properly. But more than that." He hesitated. "I tried to understand why you walked away." Astrid met his eyes, calm, but unreadable. "Because I didn't save you for gratitude. I didn't need a thank you. I just needed you to live." He exhaled, surprised by how much that answer unraveled him. He admitted, "I'm not used to people who do things without expecting something in return." "That's a sad way to live," she said gently. He smiled faintly, eyes dropping to the chipped edge of his mug. "It is." Astrid took a sip of tea watching him. She'd seen men like him before from afar, polished, robust, and insulated by wealth. But Eric didn't carry himself like royalty today. He looked like someone searching for something, maybe even someone mourning. "You seem different from what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" She tilted her head. "Cold, entitled, detached." He gave a small laugh. "Well, I'm all of those things on most days. But not today." "Why not?" "Because," he said, "today, I'm sitting across from the woman who reminded me I'm human." Astrid's lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition, like something long dormant inside her shifted. Before she could respond, their food arrived, warm cornbread, golden, and cracked steam rising from its center. The scent pulled a smile from her. "My mom used to bake cornbread like this," she murmured. "She'd say, 'Astrid, food is how we connect, even when we've got nothing else.'" Eric watched her, moved by the softness that overtook her features. "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was," Astrid said, eyes distant. "She passed when I was 12. Cancer. But she left me a mission. Help others. Build something real. I try to honor her in little ways." Eric didn't speak. He just listened. And for the first time in years, listening didn't feel like a chore. It felt like a gift. "And you," she asked, her tone lighter. "What brings a man like you to a diner like this, searching for someone like me?" He set his mug down, gaze meeting hers. "I've spent my whole life building an empire. But that night, when I thought I might die, I didn't know of contracts, or towers, or board meetings." He paused. "I thought of legacy. Not the kind made from money. The type is made from meaning. And then I saw you, and I realized maybe I've been chasing the wrong things." Astrid looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Then she reached for a piece of cornbread, broke it in two, and passed him half. She said softly, "Maybe it's not too late to chase something else." Eric took the bread from her hand. His fingers barely brushed hers, long enough to send something sharp and electric through the quiet space between them. For a moment, neither of them said anything. But something had begun. Not a promise. Not yet. Just a shift in the atmosphere, like the first breeze that hints at the changing seasons. A pull between opposites. A whisper that perhaps the storm wasn't meant to destroy them, but to bring them together. Evening had settled over Southside with the quiet weight of familiarity. Streetlights flickering on with a low hum. Porch radios murmuring jazz from some upstairs window, and the scent of home-cooked stew curling into the air like a memory you couldn't name. Astrid Moore stood at the kitchen sink in her apartment, her fingers submerged in soapy water. Her mind, however, was elsewhere, still circling the conversation she'd had that afternoon in the corner booth of Mama Ruth's diner. Eric Anderson. She had expected a man wrapped in ego and polished charm. She had expected stiff formality, maybe even a hint of condescension. But what she found was something far more dangerous. He had been sincere, and sincerity was disarming from a man who had every reason not to be. She rinsed a plate and set it in the rack, wiping her hands on a towel as she wandered to the window. Outside, the city glowed in shades of amber and gold. Cars drifted by. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby courtyard, fading like the tail end of summer. She placed a gentle hand over her belly. The twins were quiet tonight. No fluttering kicks. No acrobatics. Just a steady presence beneath her skin, a heartbeat she carried beneath her ribs, but inside every decision, every breath. She hadn't told Eric about the pregnancy. Not yet. Their connection, though real, was fragile, unnamed. And this part of her life, it wasn't just complicated. It was sacred. She needed time to know if she could trust him beyond the charm and the gratitude, beyond the soft voice in a diner and the eyes that seemed too quick to see through her. Still, something about him clung to her thoughts. Not the money, not the mystery, but how he had listened like her words carried weight in his world. She closed her eyes, feeling her mother's absence like an old bruise beneath the skin. "Mama, I wish you were here." She whispered the thought into the night, then turned away from the window. Meanwhile, in a high-rise across the city, Eric stood by his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the glittering arteries of Chicago. He held the photo Olivia had found, the one of Astrid surrounded by the kids at her community center. Her smile was luminous, something steady in how the children leaned toward her, like flowers tilting to sunlight. Eric had met countless women in his life. Socialites with curated lives, investors with sharp tongues, models with practiced laughs. But none of them lingered in his thoughts the way Astrid did. He didn't know what to do with that. He had built his entire world on logic and strategy. But nothing about her felt strategic. She simply was, unapologetically, unshakably, and it unsettled him in the best and worst ways. He ran a hand through his hair and set the photo down. He wanted to see her again. Back in Southside, the night deepened. Astrid sat curled on the couch, a half-read book open in her lap, though her eyes had long drifted from the page. Rain tapped gently against the window pane, a soft percussion that might have lulled her to sleep any other night. But not tonight. Something felt off. She couldn't name it. It wasn't a sound or a shadow, just a tightening in her chest, a shift in the air. She stood and moved to double-check the lock on the door. It clicked reassuringly beneath her fingers. Still, she paused, listening. Nothing. And yet, across the street, beneath a flickering street lamp, a figure stood still, half shrouded in darkness, watching. Marcus Reed hadn't changed much. He still wore his arrogance like cologne, thick and lingering. But tonight, he didn't feel like the man who had once warmed her sheets with lazy charm. He felt like a ghost returned not for love, but for leverage. He had seen her photo in a headline, just one glimpse: Astrid Moore seated across from Chicago's most eligible billionaire. A story practically writing itself. A woman from nothing, a man with everything, and the 2 children growing in her womb. Jackpot. He lit a cigarette with a smirk and melted back into the shadows. The next morning, Astrid arrived at the community center early. The sun had barely begun to climb, casting long golden beams through the high windows of the multi-purpose room. The center smelled of floor polish and construction paper, which smelled like purpose to Astrid. Jamal was already there, setting up folding chairs for the creative writing workshop she hosted on Thursdays. He was 15, awkward, brilliant, and once on the edge of being lost, until Astrid had handed him a notebook and told him to write down his anger instead of throwing it. "You okay, Miss Moore?" he asked, glancing up from the stack of chairs. Astrid blinked, caught off guard. "Of course. Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "You looked like you saw a ghost." She forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart." But the truth lingered behind her eyes. The figure in the shadows. The weight of secrets. As the students trickled in, Astrid tucked the thoughts away. She smiled, taught, and laughed when Jamal tried to rhyme love with refrigerator. But even as the room filled with energy, part of her remained distant, like a radio tuned half to static, half to memory. Deep down, she knew nothing had ever stayed still for long, and someone somewhere had decided her quiet life was about to get very loud. The sunlight over Southside was gentler that morning, as if the sky had paused to catch its breath. Astrid stood in the kitchen preparing a pot of ginger tea, her movements slow, instinctive. The kettle whistled softly as she pressed a hand to her belly. The twins were restless twin pulses of life blooming beneath her ribs. She had tried these past few days to return to rhythm. Teaching, organizing lesson plans, sweeping the community center's narrow hallway, and smiling at the children who needed her smile more than they'd ever admit. But beneath it all was a hum, a restless thrum in her bones. Something was coming. She could feel it, though she couldn't yet name its shape. The memory of Eric lingered like a scent on old paper. His steady voice, the almost boyish awkwardness when he'd thanked her, the way his eyes held questions he never quite asked. They hadn't spoken since the diner, and maybe that was for the best. She wasn't sure she was ready for more. Miles away, Eric Anderson leaned over a crystal tumbler of untouched bourbon, the skyline sprawling behind him in cool morning light. His penthouse was quiet, save for the low buzz of incoming messages pinging on his tablet. Board meetings, merger updates. Analysts are begging for FaceTime. But one message sat unopened, glowing stubbornly on his screen. Online now. Anderson and the mystery woman from Southside. He hadn't expected the photo to surface so soon, or at all. He hadn't noticed the phone held discreetly near the counter that day, and he hadn't thought twice about being seen outside his usual polished world, in a diner where the walls were paneled with soul and memory, instead of imported wood. But someone had noticed. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Eric leaning forward, eyes locked on a beautiful woman in a navy dress. Her face was angled in profile, lips parted in mid-sentence. There was a softness between them, too natural to be staged. A headline had done the rest. Chicago's billionaire bachelor seen in intimate moment with unknown Southside woman. Eric closed the tablet. He thought of Astrid not as the subject of a headline, but as the woman who had broken her skin to save his life, who had turned away from the explosion without waiting for thanks, who had spoken of her mother's cornbread and her students' poetry with the conviction that made billion-dollar deals feel irrelevant. He cursed under his breath, not for being seen, but for dragging her into a world that would never understand her. Astrid didn't see the photo until late afternoon. She had just finished her workshop, her hands smudged with chalk when Tanya, the center's receptionist, burst into the room, phone in hand. "Girl, you're trending." Astrid frowned. What? Tanya flipped the screen toward her. "You and Mr. Wall Street. At Mama Ruth's." Astrid's heart stopped. There it was. Her face was lit by a diner's lamplight beside a man whose net worth had its own Wikipedia page. She stared at the headline, the comments underneath multiplying like weeds. Gold digger. Cinderella. Is she even pregnant with his kids? Her breath caught, not in attendance, but on the assumption. In one image, the world had decided who she was. By that evening, the center's phone had rung nonstop. Some calls were curious, others cruel. At home, she sat silently on the couch phone on the coffee table like a live wire. Her tea had gone cold. Her pulse had not. She had built her life carefully, quietly, brick by brick. She had earned her respect in a community that didn't give it freely. And now, with one stolen photograph, she was a stranger to everyone who thought they knew her. There was a knock at the door. She hesitated, then opened it. Eric was dressed in jeans and a navy sweater, not a suit. He looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something more profound, something knotted in the chest. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "I didn't know they'd follow me. I didn't think they'd find you." Astrid crossed her arms. "But they did. I'm trying to fix it." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "You can't fix this with money." His expression shifted. "I know that now." They stood in the soft hallway light, two people from different worlds brought together by chance, and now forced to confront the price of collision. He said, I came because I didn't want you to face this alone. You didn't ask for this. No, she whispered, but I also didn't ask for you. That stung, but it was the truth, and he didn't flinch from it. I understand if you want distance, he said. I'd like the same if I were in your shoes. But if you ever decide you don't want to carry this alone, I'll be here. Astrid looked at him for a long time. She saw the sincerity, yes, but also the fear. Not of scandal or reputation, but of rejection. She softened, if only a little. You're not an evil man, Eric. He smiled faintly. That's a start. Then he turned and walked down the stairs into the night. Back inside, Astrid sank onto the couch. She didn't cry, but her hand found its way to her belly, where the twins stirred restlessly, as if sensing the world had just tilted. Outside, the first flashbulb lit the sidewalk. In the shadows across the street, Marcus Reed watched through narrowed eyes, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The morning light filtered gently through the gauzy curtains of Astrid's apartment, spilling across worn floorboards and dust motes caught mid-drift. The air smelled of cinnamon and sunlight, if such things had a scent, and for a moment it felt like the previous day's chaos had been nothing more than a bad dream. But reality had sharp edges, and it rarely waited to be invited in. Astrid sat at the table, a hand resting lightly on the curve of her stomach. She had barely touched her breakfast eggs going cold beside her untouched fork. Her mind was too full. Of headlines, of whispers. Eric's voice in the hallway last night was soft with guilt and sincere with regret. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel. Gratitude. Fear. Some strange combination of both. The knock came just after 10. It was not the hesitant knock of a neighbor, nor the hurried knock of a delivery boy. It was precise, measured, as if the person on the other side already believed the door would open, because why wouldn't it? Astrid rose slowly. A ripple of unease moved through her chest, though she couldn't say why. She opened the door. The woman who stood there was elegant in the way marble columns are elegant cold, carved and immovable. Blonde hair swept into a low chignon. Flawless skin, a pantsuit that probably cost more than Astrid's monthly salary. Her heels didn't sound as she stepped inside without being asked. Astrid Moore, she said, voice smooth, but edged in steel. Astrid lifted her chin. Who's asking? The woman offered a tight, practiced smile. Victoria Anderson, Eric's sister. Astrid's breath hitched just slightly. She stepped aside, not out of invitation, but out of instinct. Victoria moved into the room like it belonged to her eyes, skimming over the modest furniture, the worn bookshelf, the chipped ceramic mug on the windowsill. If she felt discomfort, she hid it well. Victoria said, I'm not here to exchange pleasantries, setting her designer handbag on the counter's edge, like it might catch something. I'm here because I care about my brother, and because I care about the Anderson name. Astrid crossed her arms. That makes two of us. I care about your brother too, but we're not here for the same reasons. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but her tone sharpened. Eric has a soft heart. Always has. That's why men like him need boundaries. Protection. Especially from entanglements. Astrid's stomach turned, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than words. Victoria pulled a slim envelope from her handbag and placed it on the table with a soft thud. $1 million, she said. Tax-free. Yours to use however you please. A fresh start. A home outside the city. A secure life for you and your children. Astrid looked at the envelope, then at Victoria. Is this the part where I'm supposed to cry? She asked quietly. Or thank you for rescuing me from my own life? Victoria's eyes glinted, but her voice remained composed. You're smart. You know how the world works. A woman in your position, pregnant, unmarried from Southside, being connected to a man like Eric. It's a story the press devours. You may not want the spotlight, but it's already on you. Take the offer. Walk away while you still can. Astrid stepped closer. Her voice, though soft, cut cleanly through the air. I've survived more than gossip columns. I've survived cancer eating my mother from the inside out. I've survived working 2 jobs while getting my degree. I've survived being left by the father of these babies without so much as a backward glance. I don't need your money. Victoria's expression flickered just briefly. Surprise, maybe. Or something dangerously close to respect. Astrid continued, voice trembling now, not with fear, but with fire. I may not come from your world, Ms. Anderson, but I have never used anyone to climb out of mine. So take your check, take your assumptions, and get out of my home. A silence fell, thick and crackling. Victoria slowly reached for the envelope. But before she left, she turned once more. You'll regret this, Ms. Moore. Our world doesn't open its gates for people like you. Astrid stared back, unblinking. Good. I wasn't planning to knock. When the door closed, Astrid leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Her hands shook. Her knees felt weak. But there was a steadiness inside her, a center that had not swayed. She touched her stomach. The babies kicked gently. You felt that too, didn't you? She whispered. That's the kind of storm your mama's used to. She didn't cry, but the tears lived just behind her eyelids like a storm behind glass. Across the city, Victoria stepped into her private car, jaw tight. She didn't call Eric. Not yet. She would tell him later, or not at all. Let him find out when the girl broke under the weight of expectation. She disappeared as quietly as she had arrived. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Because Astrid Moore had not looked like someone who could be bought. She had looked like someone who had already paid every price worth paying. Monday mornings at Englewood High always began with the same quiet chaos. Teenagers shuffled through the metal detectors with sleepy eyes and headphones tangled around their necks. Custodians polished floors that would be scuffed again by the third period. Teachers clutched paper cups of lukewarm coffee and smiled through exhaustion. Astrid Moore had always found comfort in the routine. It grounded her. The rhythm, the ritual. Her small, drafty classroom was papered with student poetry. It felt like its own world apart from everything else. But that morning she felt it when she stepped into the building. Eyes. Not the usual curious glances from students who adored her, but something sharper, more careful, measured, judging. She moved through the hallway trying to will her spine straight, but her breath caught when she passed the teacher's lounge, and conversation stopped mid-sentence. A few awkward smiles followed. One woman cleared her throat and quickly looked away. Astrid kept walking. Her classroom offered no refuge. There, too, the air had changed. Some students were quiet. Others watched her with wide-eyed curiosity. A few whispered with their heads bent close together, cell phones tucked just out of sight. It wasn't until the second period that the first question came. Ms. Moore, a girl named Raylan, asked, her voice hesitant. Is it true you're dating that billionaire guy from the news? The question dropped into the silence like a stone into a still lake. Everyone stopped pretending to work. Pencils paused mid-word. Eyes lifted. Astrid looked at her class. 30 faces all watching. She took a slow breath. She said gently, I'm not here to discuss my personal life. We're here to talk about Baldwin's use of metaphor. That's what matters today. A few students nodded. Some looked disappointed. A boy in the back rolled his eyes. She turned to the whiteboard and continued the lesson, but her fingers trembled around the marker. During her lunch break, Astrid sat alone in her classroom. The halls hummed outside lockers, slamming, laughter rising and falling. Her sandwich sat untouched on her desk. She was used to being seen in the ways she chose as a teacher, a mentor, a neighbor. She wasn't used to being observed, analyzed, speculated about. She reached for her phone, hesitating before unlocking it. Dozens of notifications blinked at her. A new headline had surfaced that morning. Eric Anderson's Southside flame, who is Astrid Moore. She didn't click the article. She didn't need to. As students filed out that afternoon, one of the parents stood waiting in the hallway, Mrs. Carter. Her daughter, Lila, was a sophomore in Astrid's writing class. Astrid had spent hours encouraging the shy girl to submit a piece to a citywide poetry contest. She had even stayed late on a Friday to help her revise it. But Mrs. Carter didn't smile today. "I need to speak with you," she said curtly once the students had cleared out. Astrid folded her hands. "Of course." Mrs. Carter's expression was polite but distant. "I've seen the headlines, the photographs. I don't pretend to understand what's happening between you and that man, but it's becoming distracting." Astrid's mouth went dry. "Distracting?" "My daughter asked if she could wear lipstick to class today," Mrs. Carter said, voice sharp. "She said she wanted to look like someone a rich man might notice. That's not the kind of influence I want for her." Astrid's chest tightened. "I've always held you in high regard," the woman continued. "But the community is watching, and some of us are concerned about the example this sets." Astrid couldn't speak, not right away, not without unraveling. So she nodded once. "Professional, composed. I understand." Mrs. Carter left with a slight nod. The door clicked behind her like a verdict. Astrid sat back in her chair, fingers curled tightly in her lap. She had never wanted to be a symbol, not for anything. She had just wanted to teach, to help, to do something that mattered. And now, her presence felt like a liability. When she returned home that evening, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The walls are too close. The silence is too heavy. She didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the armchair by the window, hands wrapped around her belly, watching the glow of traffic dance across the ceiling. Maybe Victoria had been right, she thought bitterly. Not about who I am, but about how the world would choose to see me. Her chest ached. She had fought hard to become someone her students could admire. And now, with one photograph, one dinner, one name dropped into the wrong circles, her identity had become warped, twisted by strangers into something she didn't recognize. But then, a soft thump, a gentle nudge beneath her hand. The twins, still here, still growing, still hers. Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the warm press of life beneath her skin. "You are not a scandal," she whispered. "You are not a mistake. And I will not let the world define us." She felt something like a vow rising in her throat in the darkness. And in that moment, tired, worn, but not broken, she remembered who she was. Astrid Moore, daughter of grace, bearer of fire. The boardroom at Anderson Tower had always felt like a cathedral to Eric, its high glass walls and sweeping city views, lending an illusion of clarity and omnipotence. The table was long and made of imported mahogany, and the men around it wore confidence-like tailored suits. But this morning, Eric felt none of it. The quarterly financial review droned on, but he couldn't hear anything. Not really. Not over the ringing in his ears or the steady thud of his pulse. Across the conference table, Olivia Bennett, his assistant confidant, and occasional conscience watched him with narrowed eyes. She had seen him distracted before, but this was something different. This wasn't fatigue or overwork. This was emotional. The meeting ended with polite applause and nods from the executives. Eric stood nodded mechanically and left without a word. Olivia followed. In his office, She closed the door behind her. It's happening. He loosened his tie. What, you're falling for her? Eric let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Is it that obvious? Olivia arched a brow. You skipped a 7-figure deal this morning because you were too busy staring out the window like a character in a French novel. Eric turned away, pacing toward the glass wall that overlooked the city. His voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. She's not like anyone I've ever met. Olivia crossed her arms. I can see that. But this isn't just about who she is, Eric. It's about what the world wants to turn her into. He looked at her, jaw tense. That's why I have to do something. Olivia's voice dropped. Something like what? He didn't answer. That afternoon, a press conference was announced, not in a hotel ballroom or corporate lobby, but in the modest courtyard of the Southside Community Center, the same place where Astrid had taught poetry under flickering lights and patched ceiling tiles. The local media came in cautious waves, drawn by curiosity and the tantalizing scent of scandal. Cameramen jostled for space. Microphones were tested. Some expected damage control. Others expected denial. What they got was something else entirely. Eric stepped up to the small wooden podium. No teleprompter. No publicist. No carefully drafted statement. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just above the wrist. His tie was absent. So was any trace of the businessman who once operated like clockwork. I know some of you came here today expecting a confession, he began, voice calm but clear, or a carefully worded distraction. I have neither. A murmur rustled through the crowd. I want to speak about Astrid Moore. At that, silence fell. She saved my life. Not just the night of the accident, but in the days that followed. In the way she looks at the world. She carries her mother's memory like a flame that refuses to go out in how she teaches and lives. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. She's not a story, Eric said. She's not a scandal. And she's certainly not for sale. He paused. I stand beside her, fully. And if anyone has a problem, they can speak to me. Not her. He stepped away from the podium, leaving the reporters stunned and silent, if only for a moment. Astrid hadn't been told about the press conference. Not beforehand. She had been leading a tutoring session in the next room, unaware of the crowd gathering outside the center's garden. It wasn't until Tanya burst in breathless that she learned Eric was on the lawn, with a dozen cameras pointed at him. She slipped into the back of the crowd, standing in the shadow of a tree. When Eric spoke her name, her heart didn't drop. It soared, because he hadn't tried to protect her by hiding her. He had chosen to see her, and to be seen beside her. The crowd began to disperse when the conference ended, and Eric turned. Their eyes met across the courtyard. She didn't run to him. She didn't need to. He walked toward her slow and steady, like someone who had finally stopped fighting the wind. You didn't have to do that, she said when he reached her. I know, he replied, but I wanted to. For a moment, the noise around them faded, the rustle of reporters, the flash of phones, the whispers of a world that always wanted to name what it didn't understand. Astrid looked up at him, her face unreadable. You just made things harder for yourself. Eric smiled softly. Maybe. But for the first time in a long time, it feels worth it. She said nothing, but she didn't look away. Elsewhere, not far from the gathering, a figure leaned against a parked car. Marcus Reed watched the entire press conference unfold through the screen of his phone, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. His smirk was slow, smug. Well, well, he murmured, flicking ash onto the sidewalk. Didn't expect you to fall that hard, Anderson. He slid his phone into his pocket and turned toward his car, where a man in a leather jacket waited in the driver's seat. Call the blogger, Marcus said as he climbed in. It's time to make things interesting. Got a story? Marcus grinned. Better. I've got ammunition. As the car pulled away, Marcus stared at the photo on his phone. Astrid radiant in the late afternoon sun, standing beside a man worth more than most countries. I hope you're ready to bleed, sweetheart, he whispered, because I'm not done yet. It began with a headline. Not a large one, not from a major outlet, just a small blog with a reputation for scandal dressed as truth. Astrid Moore's secret. X. A dangerous past. The Andersons don't want you to know. Astrid was at the community center when she saw it standing beside the printer, thumbing through student permission slips when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the notification, her eyes catching the words, criminal record, restraining order, pattern of manipulation. She stared for a long moment before tapping the screen. The article was long, designed to inflame. It painted her as a woman with a shadowy past, a manipulator who used her pregnancy as leverage. This teacher once had a man removed from her apartment under suspicious circumstances. Marcus's name was buried, never directly mentioned, just a source close to the situation. Photos from years ago, her leaving a courthouse, her standing outside a hospital, her face exhausted and young, were laced between paragraphs like landmines. Every sentence twisted facts into poison. And the comments. She didn't read them. She couldn't. Her hands began to shake. By the time she reached her apartment, the article had spread. She opened her laptop and found dozens of unread messages in her inbox. Some sympathetic, most not. Accusations, assumptions, threats disguised as concern. She closed the screen and pressed her palms against her face. It felt like being buried alive. She'd worked so hard to build something honest. She had clawed her way back from that past, sweat by sweat, day by day. And now Marcus had found a way to turn her silence into a weapon. He hadn't even needed to lie. All he had to do was suggest. That evening, a black town car pulled up to her curb. She didn't answer the knock. Not at first, but after the third, she opened the door. Eric stood there, tension radiating from him like heat. He held out his phone wordlessly, the article open on the screen. I read it, Astrid said quietly. I wanted to hear it from you. Her stomach twisted. You think it's true? No, he said. Too fast, too forceful. But there was something behind his eyes. No doubt exactly, but something adjacent. A flicker of fear buried deep. She crossed her arms, suddenly cold. You read about Marcus, about the restraining order. Eric's jaw tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't owe you that yet, she said. Because I've had enough men look at me like I'm broken. I didn't want you to be one of them. I'm not. But you are, she said. Right now you are. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Eric stepped closer, his voice softer. I'm trying to understand. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering but dry. Do you want to understand me, Eric, or do you want to manage me? He flinched. She stepped back, her hand gently resting on her belly. You think I don't know how this looks? You think I don't know how easily a man like Marcus can twist a story and bury me under it? I've lived with the weight of his shadow for years. I don't care about the article, Eric said, voice strained. But the world will. My board has already called. Shareholders are asking questions. There it was. Not judgment, not betrayal, but self-preservation. And somehow that hurt more. Astrid turned away. You should go. He hesitated. Astrid? But she didn't look back. Didn't answer. She stood still, one hand on the table for balance, the other pressed protectively to her belly, 2 heartbeats beneath her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her own. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. That night, Astrid couldn't sleep. She lay in bed with the lights off, listening to the distant sound of cars and the occasional bark of a stray dog. The city outside her window kept moving, kept glowing, but inside she was still and angry, still and heartbroken. Marcus had known precisely what he was doing. He had taken a truth ugly, painful, but hers, and dressed it in malice. And the world had licked its lips. She turned on her side, her hand resting on her stomach. "It's okay," she whispered to the twins. "I've carried worse." Across the city, Eric sat on the edge of his bed phone beside him, unread messages blinking like beacons. He rubbed a hand over his face, his heart heavy with regret. He hadn't accused her, but he hadn't protected her either. He had stood at that press conference, declared himself beside her, yet when it counted, he had hesitated. And she had seen it. He stared at the window, the city lights blurring behind the glass. His father once told him that power is protected, but also requires sacrifice. He had said, "You can't hold both the world and the truth. You must choose which one you'll serve." But Eric no longer knew which was which. And for the first time he wondered if he had been raised to build towers that couldn't shelter anyone. In a cheap motel across town, Marcus flicked through the latest headlines, one leg lazily crossed over the other. He sipped from a paper cup of coffee, watching the online storm swell. "Not bad," he murmured. "Round one's a win." He set the cup down and smiled. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. Just after sunset, Astrid walked the broken edge of 63rd Street, the shadows lengthening over the asphalt like spilled ink. Southside wore the dusk like a second skin. Half-forgotten buildings bathed in copper-light windows open with voices and music bleeding softly into the night air. She shouldn't have come alone. She knew that. But silence had never saved her. And if she didn't face Marcus now, he would only keep pushing until nothing was left to protect. She spotted him outside a convenience store, leaning against a cracked brick wall beneath a buzzing neon sign that read, "Open," though the O blinked on and off like a warning. He wore the same leather jacket the last time he broke her heart, crossed her arms, and balanced her cigarette between two fingers like a stage prop. He looked exactly how she remembered, and nothing like she remembered. Time had bloated the charm and smoothed over the edges of danger with something worse calculation. He saw her approach and smiled, slow and lazy. "Well, well," Marcus drawled, tossing the cigarette to the ground. "Didn't think you had the nerve to find me yourself." Astrid stopped a few feet away, chin lifted. "I'm not here for games." He laughed, a deep, dismissive sound. "Then you came to the wrong person, sweetheart. I know what you did." He feigned innocence. "Did what leaked the story. Dug up my past. Used it against me." His smirk didn't waver. "I just reminded the world of the truth." "No," she said. "You reminded the world of the version that makes you feel powerful." His smile dropped. "Please don't preach to me, Astrid. You don't get to play the saint. Not after how you walked out on me, like I was trash, like you were too good for me." She said, "I walked out because you scared me," voice low, "even because you started raising your voice. Then your hand. Because you drank until your breath became something I flinched from. I didn't leave you. I escaped you." He moved faster than she expected. He was inches away in an instant, towering over her, breath sour with something fermented. "You think Anderson's gonna keep you when he finds out how messy you are?" he hissed. "You feel a man like that marries the girl from Southside." She didn't step back. "Not this time," she said quietly, "that if he doesn't, that's his weakness, not mine." Marcus just stared at her. Then he laughed again, but the sound was ugly this time. Joyless. He said, "I don't want your money," backing away with a shrug. "I don't want your fame. I want you to be uncomfortable. I want you sweating every time your phone rings. I want to own a piece of your peace. Astrid blinked. That was it. Not greed. Control. He didn't want what she had. He wanted to make sure she never felt safe holding it. You don't get to haunt me, she whispered. Not anymore. He tilted his head. Don't I already? She stepped closer, voice like steel silk. I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. You should be. No, she said. You should be afraid of the woman who survived you. Something flickered in his eyes, then not fear but uncertainty. Just for a second. Just enough. She turned her back and walked away before he could recover. The street behind her echoed with footsteps, cars and music, but inside, there was only the beating of her heart. Fierce, loud, unapologetic. When she reached her apartment, the outside world buzzed with scandal and noise. But inside it was quiet. Safe. Tanya had texted her. You okay? Want me to stay the night? Astrid replied. No. I need to be alone. Just for tonight. She placed a hand over her stomach. The twins fluttered like moths under her ribs. Almost there, she whispered. We're almost through it. She walked into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same girl Marcus once left crying on a rainy curb. She was tired, yes, worn around the eyes, but stronger, sharper. She pulled off her earrings. Her fingers trembled only slightly. Meanwhile, Eric sat in his office with the lights off. The city outside blinked in blues and silvers, tall buildings, reflecting fragments of his life. He had reread the article. He had watched Astrid shut the door between them, and he had realized something painful. He had failed her. Not with words, but with doubt. The very thing she feared most. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo, one of his mother Victoria and himself as a boy. His mother's eyes held the same calculating brilliance that Victoria had perfected a family of survivors. But Astrid didn't survive by calculation. She survived by choosing not to shrink, and he had asked her to. He picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over her name. He didn't press call. Not yet. Not until he could say something that wasn't an apology or a defense, but the truth. At that same hour, Marcus stood on the balcony of a downtown high-rise. He'd already been paid for his story by a site eager to capitalize on the Anderson scandal. But money was never the prize. Control was. He lit another cigarette and smiled into the wind. Astrid might have walked away tonight, but the game wasn't over. Not yet. Because if Eric Anderson were everything the world thought he was, he'd soon have to choose. The truth or the brand. And Marcus intended to make that decision a bomb. The morning after Astrid shut her door on him, Eric stood motionless in the center of his living room. No music, no screens. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, and the ticking of the minimalist wall clock, a gift from Victoria. It had never kept time correctly, yet he'd never had the heart to throw it away. He stared at it now, as if trying to make it sync with the pulse in his throat. Time was moving with or without him. He had always thought of himself as a man who faced things: boardroom battles, market collapses, lawsuits, death. But this was different. This was personal. And he had flinched. Worse, he had looked Astrid in the eye and let silence answer her pain. He hadn't meant to, but that didn't matter. Intent didn't undo impact. He walked toward the glass wall and pressed his palm against it. She was probably brushing chalk dust from her fingertips, pretending she didn't notice the whispers, and carrying two lives while shielding her own. She'd said she survived Marcus. But Eric didn't want her to have to survive him too. He picked up the phone and dialed the person who always dealt with facts. Olivia. She answered on the first ring. You finally decided to stop sulking. I need you to find something. There was a pause. Then her voice was sharp with interest. Go on. Marcus Reed, born and raised in Chicago. Had a thing with Astrid years ago. I want everything. Arrests, court filings, sealed documents, restraining orders, dropped charges. I don't care how deep you have to go. Another pause. You're not looking to bury him, she said carefully. You're looking to unearth something real. I'm tired of speculation, Eric said. I want the truth. You realize that if you find what I think you're looking for, it might worsen things before they get better. I'm not doing this for headlines. Good, Olivia replied, because this won't be pretty. It took less than 48 hours. The file arrived by encrypted email, over 100 pages of court transcripts, affidavits, psychological evaluations, and bruised silence. Eric read it alone. Each line peeled back the story Astrid never told. Marcus had been arrested twice, both cases dropped, due to lack of witness testimony. Astrid had filed for a temporary restraining order 2 years ago. It had been granted, then dissolved after 90 days. There were no photographs attached. But there were words. So many words. Language soaked in fear and control. And there was one entry that made Eric's breath catch. A hospital record. Astrid Moore, ER admission. Dislocated wrist. Soft tissue bruising along the upper arm. No charges filed. She had gone in under a false name. She had signed herself out before morning. He sat back in his chair, hand trembling slightly. It wasn't just survival. It had been silent. Chosen silence. Because no one had protected her when she needed it most. And now Marcus was back, polished and petty, with just enough poison in his charm to go undetected. Eric closed the file and stood slowly. He had spent most of his life being careful, strategic, measured. But what he felt now wasn't strategy. It was fury. Not the loud kind, not theatrical. It was the kind of anger that stripped everything unnecessary and left only purpose. That night, he went to her. No town car, no driver. Just him, coat open to the wind, heart in his hands. Astrid opened the door slowly. She looked tired, her eyes bruised with sleeplessness, but her chin was high. I wasn't expecting you. I know. They stood in the hallway for a beat. He held up a file. I found it. Everything. What he did. What he erased. Her face remained still. Why now, she asked. Because I should have believed you without proof. She didn't take the folder from his hand. I didn't ask you to investigate him. I know, he said softly. But I needed to see the man who hurt you. Not because I doubt you, but because I doubted myself. She blinked, her throat tightening. And now I know I should have stood beside you in that moment, when the past tried to swallow you whole, and I failed. He stepped closer. I don't care what the world says about you, Astrid. I care about how I see you. And how do you see yourself? And right now, if you let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to carry anything alone again. The words hung in the quiet. She looked at him for a long moment. Her lip trembled once, just once, but she steadied it. Then she finally took the file from his hand. Not because she needed it, but because he had earned the right to hand it to her. Later that night, she sat by the window, the folder unopened on the table. Eric had gone quietly without asking to stay. He understood her need for stillness. She didn't cry. She listened to the hum of her breathing, the rhythm of the babies shifting inside her, the echo of a man's voice promising nothing flashy, just presence. And it was enough. Not because it solved everything, but because it reminded her that healing didn't always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a man willing to listen after the silence. Monday arrived with no fanfare, just wind through bare trees and a pale sky bruised with the color of sleep. The city had moved on to a new scandal, some politician's affair, some celebrity's meltdown. The headlines had drifted elsewhere, but the echo of her name still lingered soft and suspicious in corners, where people gathered and whispered. Astrid stood in front of her closet, one hand resting on the round swell of her stomach. Her maternity blouse was pressed, and her slacks were loose at the waist. She had gone over the decision for days. Should she resign? Should she wait until maternity leave? But she couldn't. Not because she had something to prove, but because this place, this work, had always been hers. Long before Eric. Long before Marcus's poison. Long before anyone decided she was worth photographing. She slipped her shoes on and tied her hair back. As she glanced in the mirror, she didn't see a woman broken by gossip or wearied by judgment. She saw someone still standing. That would have to be enough. The walk to the school felt longer than usual, every step a drumbeat of tension. The morning air was cold against her cheeks, the silence of the sidewalk occasionally broken by the rush of a passing bus or the bark of a dog hidden behind a gate. She braced herself when she turned the corner onto the block where Englewood High stood. But what greeted her wasn't cruelty. It was stillness. The security guard at the gate. Mr. Tyrrell nodded as he always did. Ms. Moore. His voice held no edge, no change. She exhaled a little. Inside the hallways hummed with the same sound they always did, sneakers squeaking against waxed tile lockers, slamming laughter echoing off walls layered in old flyers and fading murals. No one whispered as she passed. A few looked, a few didn't. She reached her classroom, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The scent of chalk and old paper hit her all at once. The desks were just as she'd left them, angled slightly askew, as if waiting to be righted by her hands. The board still bore fragments of her last lesson. She took a deep breath. And then the bell rang. Her first class arrived slowly, hesitantly. Some kids walked in with their heads high, pretending nothing had happened. Others kept their eyes down, uncertain. Raylin, the girl who had once asked if Astrid was dating a billionaire, slid into her seat and fiddled with a pen. Astrid stepped before the desk, pressing her palms lightly against the wood. I'm not going to talk about what's online, she said. Not today. Maybe not ever. A pause. Then, but I will say this. You can survive a lot of things. Being misunderstood and being watched and being doubted. But what matters most, what always matters, is how you choose to respond. She glanced at the class. You can respond by shrinking, or by staying. No one spoke, but Raylin raised her hand. Are we still doing the poetry showcase? Astrid blinked, then smiled. Absolutely. A soft wave of breath moved through the room, tension deflating, and in that moment, the unspoken truth emerged like a sunrise behind fog. They had seen her bruised, yes, but not broken. During lunch, Astrid sat in the faculty lounge. It had been weeks since she last did so. She expected silence, maybe cold glances, a quiet exile dressed in politeness. Instead, Mrs. Rodriguez slid a container of chicken empanadas across the table and said, "For the babies." Mr. Liu offered her a seat beside the window. "It's warmer here." Even Mr. Harding, the history teacher who barely made eye contact, nodded her way and said, "Brave thing coming back. You've got guts." Astrid didn't cry. But something inside her softened. These weren't grand gestures, just quiet acknowledgments. But they meant everything. She packed her things slowly. Her back ached in the low, dull way it had for the past 2 weeks, and her ankles were starting to swell. But still she smiled, because she had come back to the place where her name had almost been dragged into silence, and she had made it her own again. A small envelope fell between 2 student notebooks as she reached for her coat. She picked it up, puzzled. No name on the front, Just a drawing of a tree sketched in pencil. Its roots tangled its branches reaching beyond the edge of the paper. Inside was a note, in careful teenage handwriting. You taught me how to write what hurts. Now I'm learning how to live through it too. Thank you. She stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it neatly, placed it in her bag, and left the room with her shoulders just a little higher. That night, she didn't turn the lights on right away when she entered her apartment. She stood by the window watching the streetlights blink to life one by one. Her phone buzzed, a text from Eric. Can I see you tomorrow, just as I... Not as a headline, not as a man with something to fix. Just me. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the message, the glow of it painting her face with a quiet sort of warmth. Then she whispered into the stillness, maybe. And for now, it may be enough. The message came at noon. Pick you up at 4. No cameras, no suits, just us. Astrid stared at the text longer than she needed to. Part of her wanted to ignore it. Another part, quieter, deeper, felt drawn by the simplicity of his tone, not begging and not performing. Just a calm offering. She said yes. At 4:01 p.m., a dark green sedan, not a town car, pulled up to the curb outside her building. No driver. Just Eric was behind the wheel, one hand resting casually against the steering wheel sleeves, rolled to his elbows, and the other gripping a paper coffee cup like he'd forgotten how to let it go. She climbed in. Hi, he said. Hi. They didn't speak for the first few minutes, and their silence was not awkward, but reverent, like neither wanted to startle the fragile stillness forming between their wounds. He didn't tell her where they were going. She didn't ask. She watched the city thin out as they drove north past the glass towers through old tree-lined streets where the air smelled faintly of cedar and ash. Then finally into a stretch of wooded stillness that felt forgotten by time. A wrought iron gate appeared at the end of the gravel road flanked by stone pillars and tangled ivy. It creaked open at the touch of a remote, revealing a winding drive flanked by dormant rose bushes and cypress trees bowing under the weight of early winter. At the end of the path stood a house, or rather, what had once been a house and was now something more spectral. A 2-story stone manor with shuttered windows and a slate roof stained with age. The paint had peeled in places. Vines clung to the facade like secrets. Astrid stepped out slowly. What is this place? She asked. Eric joined her on the gravel. My mother's estate. She lived here until I turned 20. After she died, I locked it up and never came back. Astrid looked up at the shuttered windows. Why today? Eric's voice was quiet. Because the last time I came here, I swore I'd never let another woman carry the weight she did. I want you to see where that promise was born, even if I failed. Inside, the air was cold but clean. He had sent someone to dust, but not to stage it. No fresh flowers, no new furniture, just the untouched bones of a life lived in exquisite restraint. The foyer opened into a sitting room, still lined with antique books. A grand piano stood by the window, its keys yellowed untouched. Portraits lined the walls, his mother in crisp black dresses, her gaze always somewhere above the viewer, as if watching time pass. Eric said she never let herself soften watching Astrid take it in. She ran our house like a boardroom. Every emotion is neatly pressed between expectations. Astrid turned to him. And you? I was the mistake she didn't regret out loud. Astrid didn't flinch. She had heard that ache in hallways poems and the silence of girls who smiled too easily. Eric walked to the mantel and picked up a small framed photograph. It was faded. A boy 9 or 10 stood beside a stoic woman on the front lawn, his face too solemn for his age. I used to practice smiling in the mirror before dinner, he said, because if I didn't do it just right, she'd send me to bed without speaking. Astrid stepped beside him, fingers grazing the edge of the frame. "I never knew that version of you," she whispered. "I never let anyone know him." He looked at her, then eyes clear but shadowed. "But I want you to, even if he's ugly, even if he doesn't match the man you think I am." Astrid was quiet for a moment. Then she asked softly, "What happened to her?" Eric's jaw tensed. "She died of pancreatic cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to dust. By the time she let anyone in, it was too late. And the house, she left it to me, along with her voice in my head." Astrid turned slowly toward the large bay window overlooking the overgrown garden. The sun was low now, casting long honey-gold shadows across the floor. She tried to control everything Astrid murmured, but the garden rebelled. Eric let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. She would have hated that sentence. "I like it," Astrid said. "It means something kept growing even when she stopped tending it." He crossed the room slowly, stopping just behind her. "You remind me of her in one way." Astrid raised an eyebrow. "That better be a compliment." "It is," he said. "You both command a room without raising your voice." She turned to face him, her voice barely above a whisper. "The difference is, I've had to scream in silence just to be heard." He nodded. "I know. That's why I'm listening now." They sat on the old velvet couch as the last light faded, neither rushing to speak. The quiet between them was no longer fragile, but warm, earned. Astrid looked around the room. She tried to build a fortress, she said, but what you needed was a home. Eric looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "And what about you? What did you need?" She didn't answer right away. "Then I needed someone who wouldn't walk away the first time I broke." He didn't reach for her hand. Instead, he leaned forward and said the words without a grand gesture, "I'm still here." As they left the house later, Eric locked the door behind him, not to hide the past, but to honor it, to say goodbye. Astrid stood under the porch light, the wind teasing the edge of her coat. "This place, it held you for too long." He nodded. "It's time I live outside it." She smiled faintly. "Then let's not come back." They didn't kiss. But something passed between them in that moment, quieter than desire, more profound than words. A kind of belonging. A place with no shutters. It arrived not as a phone call, nor a knock, but as a file. Hand-delivered. No name, no return address. Eric found it waiting on his desk one morning, sealed in a manila envelope with a single word scrawled in ink across the front. Decide. Inside were photos grainy, but unmistakable. Astrid stepped into a clinic. Astrid is meeting a lawyer. Astrid was walking beside Tanya through a quiet park. Alongside the images stapled neatly was a draft story. Headline ready, pulled from the cruel imagination of someone who understood how to spin poison like silk. Anderson heir in jeopardy. Billionaire's unborn twins caught in custody. Battle with troubled mother. There were fake legal threats, forged statements. References to Astrid's long-expired restraining order are twisted to suggest instability. But it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. A whispered ultimatum written between the lines. "Please step away from her, or this goes public." Eric stared at the photos for long, a cold stillness taking root beneath his ribs. He didn't need a signature to know the sender. Marcus Reed had moved from the shadows to open fire. And this time he wasn't bluffing. That evening, Eric sat in the back of his favorite jazz bar. It was a quiet, velvet-draped place between two bookshops where the saxophone always came soft and the whiskey never watered down. He hadn't brought security. He didn't need to. Marcus slid into the booth across from him, looking pleased with himself. He wore a thin black turtleneck, and the smirk of a man who had spent years convincing himself that destruction was a form of power. "I see you got my message," Marcus said, voice syrupy. Eric didn't reply. "I'm giving you the courtesy of seeing it first," Marcus continued, "before it leaks. Before the board starts whispering. Before the world decides your precious image is tarnished." Eric swirled the amber liquid in his glass once, twice, then said quietly, "You've been planning this since the day she left you." Marcus laughed low and bitter. "You think this is about a breakup?" "No," Eric said, setting the glass down. "It's about control. She was the one thing you couldn't manipulate, so now you're trying to punish her through me." "Call it what you want," Marcus replied. "But we both know how this ends. Astrid Moore gets painted as unstable, unfit, and opportunistic. You get to back away clean. No scandal, no babies, no complicated optics for Anderson Global." Eric leaned forward, and for the first time, Marcus's smile faltered. "I'm not walking away." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Then you're a fool." Maybe Eric said, his voice calm. "But I'd rather lose everything I've built than let someone like you win." Marcus's jaw clenched. Eric stood, leaving a folded slip of paper on the table. "You underestimated her. That's your fatal mistake." "What's this proof?" Eric said. "Of the restraining order she took out against you. Of the hospital records. Of your sealed juvenile assault file." "I don't need to use it." He paused. "But if you touch her again, if you so much as mention her name in the wrong tone, then I will." He walked away without looking back, and Marcus for the first time didn't follow. That night, Eric found Astrid at her apartment, curled up on the couch beneath a threadbare blanket, a book open on her knees, but unread. She looked up when he entered. Her eyes searched his face, and then slowly she asked, "What did he want?" Eric sat beside her quiet for a long moment. Then he told her everything. The photos, the forged statements. The plan was to make her unfit. He didn't spare the ugliness. He didn't shield her with softened words, because she deserved the truth. When he finished, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She sat very still, then whispered, "This is what I feared, that loving someone like you would paint a target on my back." Eric reached for her hand, but paused just before touching her. "I can walk away if that would protect you." "I will." She turned to him and said with remarkable clarity, "Don't you dare." A pause. "You think I've made it this far by backing down when people told me I wasn't enough? I've been underestimated since I was a child. Poor, black, female, single, pregnant. None of those things broke me." She leaned forward, touching her forehead to his. "Marcus doesn't get to be the last storm I survive. He's just another page." Eric closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. "I want to protect you." "You are," she said softly. Not with silence, but with truth. 3 days later, Eric called a press conference. It was brief, controlled, sharp. He told the world that he was expecting twins with a woman he loved. He told them that she was not a scandal, but a survivor, a teacher, a future mother who had fought harder for peace than most men ever would for power. And then, before stepping away from the podium, he said one final thing: "I would rather build something honest from scratch than preserve something powerful through fear. My legacy is not Anderson Global. My legacy is who I choose to stand beside." And just like that, he chose her. Publicly, permanently. The storm rolled in on a Thursday. Not the loud kind. The world didn't fall apart in thunder or flashbulbs. It came quietly, with a hush of wind and the scent of wet asphalt threading through the air like a warning. Manhattan felt subdued, the sky a heavy quilt of slate and smoke. Astrid was already feeling off. She hadn't slept the night before. The twins shifted more than usual, like they too sensed something changing. Her back ached. Her chest felt tight. But she chalked it up to the discomfort of being 38 weeks pregnant. Until her breath hitched, then another sharp twist bloomed low and sudden. And then, the floor beneath her was damp. She stared down half in disbelief. Then the pain returned stronger, rhythmic. This was it. It was happening. Eric was stuck in traffic when he got the call. He had just left a board meeting where nothing seemed to matter anymore. Not margins, not mergers, not press. Astrid was in labor. His driver offered to reroute, but Eric shook his head and jumped out of the car. The rain had just begun, gentle but persistent, the kind that soaks your shirt in under 10 steps. He ran anyway. Through the puddled sidewalks, past the blur of umbrellas and taxis honking into dusk. His suit clung to him. His shoes were ruined. But he ran. Because no part of him could bear the thought of her doing this alone. Astrid clutched Tanya's hand so tightly at the hospital that her knuckles ached. The pain came in waves, relentless and raw, and yet she stayed quiet, focused. Breathing. Remembering every coping technique and grounding mantra she'd taught her students in moments of panic. But no amount of calm could mask the fear tucked behind her rib cage. She needed him, not for rescue, but for witness. For that moment when their children entered the world, she needed his eyes to meet hers. She whispered his name once between clenched teeth and sweat-slicked skin. And then the door swung open. He was there, rain-soaked, breathless, eyes wide with something more profound than panic. "Eric, I'm here," he said, moving to her side, cupping her face like she was the only thing tethering him to gravity. "I'm here." And for the first time that day, she let go. The hours blurred after that. Pain and breath. Push and pulse. A scream ripped from somewhere ancient and holy. And then cries. Tiny, gasping cries that filled the sterile room with a sound too perfect ever to be rehearsed. A boy and a girl. Two heartbeats once hidden beneath hers, now their own. Astrid lay back against the pillows, exhausted, trembling tears sliding into her hair. Eric stood frozen, staring down at the two impossibly small humans placed gently in her arms. He touched their heads like they were made of glass. One had his mouth, the other eye. "They're real," he whispered, stunned. "They're ours," she said, smiling through the ache. Later, when the room was dim and quiet, Eric sat in the chair beside Astrid's bed, holding their daughter, while she cradled their son. The world outside still stormed, but in this room, everything was still. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted softly. Astrid turned to him, her voice faint but certain. "You already are." He looked up. "You showed up." The next morning, Eric released a handwritten statement to the press. Not through his PR team, not through polished language. Just 3 lines published plainly on the Anderson Foundation website. "My children were born yesterday, a boy and a girl. Their mother is the bravest woman I know. We are home now." That was it. No damage control, no spin, just the truth. And the world responded not with scandal, but with grace. Because sometimes even the coldest eyes soften when they witness love take its purest form. 6 weeks later, Astrid stood at the edge of the Anderson estate garden, once a symbol of confinement, now a place reborn. Tiny roses had started to bloom again under her direction. A blanket lay on the grass behind her, where the twins slept in the shade, gurgling softly. Eric approached with 2 mugs of tea, handing her one. She took it, fingers brushing his. "They'll grow fast," he murmured, glancing toward the babies. I know. We'll blink, and they'll run through these hedges like wild things. She smiled. Good. Let them run. He looked at her, then, not with the awe of a man stunned by beauty, but the steadiness of one who had finally found home. Love, they'd learned, didn't always come in lightning bolts. Sometimes it arrived like a whisper at the back of the room, a hand at the small of your back, a voice that says, I see all of you, and I'm staying anyway. They had found that, together, against expectation, against legacy, against the odds. And that kind of love, it didn't just change lives, it created them. Thank you for walking every step of this journey with Astrid and Eric through storms, scandals, and soft beginnings. If their story moved you even just a little, don't forget to like, comment your favorite moment, and follow the channel so we can keep bringing you stories where love wins the quiet battles. We'll see you in the next chapter of Hearts.